All right, buckle up, language lovers, because today we are diving headfirst into the fascinating world of Latvian.
Latvian. Oh, you're in for a treat. It's one of those languages that's both ancient and full of surprises.
You know me, I love a good linguistic mystery. So before we get too deep into the nitty-gritty, can you give us the lay of the land? Where does Latvian fit into the grand scheme of the language family tree?
Okay, so picture this. Latvian is nestled comfortably within the Indo-European family, right alongside English, Spanish, Hindi, you name it. But here's the thing. It belongs to the Baltic branch, which automatically makes it one of the oldest surviving Indo-European languages in Europe.
Oldest surviving. Wow, we're talking serious linguistic history here.
Mhm.
And get this, one of the articles I read mentioned links to Sanskrit. Sanskrit! It's like finding a secret passageway between ancient India and the Baltics.
It's a connection that makes you realize how interconnected languages really are. You can actually find traces of this ancient link in the language even today. Ever noticed how the Latvian word for sun is sol?
Saul.
Yep.
It does have a certain ring to it, doesn't it?
Well, that ring just might be an echo of its ancient Sanskrit counterpart. And there are grammatical structures that hint at this shared ancestry. It's like piecing together a centuries-old linguistic puzzle.
All right, you've officially blown my mind.
Oh.
Now, I have to admit, one of the first things that always grabbed me about Latvian was the alphabet itself. It's like a visual feast. But those diacritics, I always find myself wondering how on earth to pronounce some of those letters.
Ah, the Latvian alphabet, a source of endless fascination and maybe a little bit of intimidation.
If you can say that again.
But trust me, it's more approachable than you might think. The modern Latvian alphabet, as we know it today, is actually a product of the early 20th century. It underwent a pretty dramatic shift, moving away from a more German-influenced system.
Wait, the Latvian alphabet we see today wasn't always there. So what was used before and what prompted this transformation?
You're right to be curious. For centuries, Latvian orthography, which basically means its writing system, was under the heavy influence of German. But in the early 1900s, Latvian linguists decided it was time for their writing system to more accurately reflect the sounds of their spoken language.
Makes sense. So where did they turn for inspiration?
Believe it or not, they found inspiration in Czech.
Czech. Now that's a plot twist I wasn't expecting. What makes Czech a good model for the Latvian alphabet?
Well, Czech orthography is famous for being incredibly consistent in its use of diacritics. Those little marks above and below letters, they act as clear guides to pronunciation, ensuring that each sound is represented accurately in writing. Latvian linguists saw this as the perfect model for capturing the nuances of their own language.
So those diacritics, the macrons, the commas underneath, they're not just there for decoration. They pack a phonetic punch. Can you give us a crash course in how they change pronunciation?
Absolutely. Let's take the letter E, for instance. Without a diacritic, it's a closed E sound, kind of like the E in get. But add that little macron above it, boom, it transforms into an open E sound, similar to the A in cat. Subtle, but oh so important in spoken Latvian.
I never realized how much weight those seemingly small marks carry. They completely change the game when it comes to pronunciation. But what about those letters with the commas underneath? Those always throw me for a loop.
You mean letters like and Those are what we call our palatalized consonants.
Powellized. Okay, that sounds pretty technical. Break it down for me what's happening in my mouth when I try to make those sounds.
Imagine this, when you see those commas, they're basically telling your tongue to do a little dance closer to the roof of your mouth as you pronounce the consonant. They add this wonderfully unique quality to the sound that, unfortunately, we just don't have in English. It's almost like a subtle yi sound before the consonant.
Okay, so it's all about tongue placement. It's incredible how much thought and history are woven into something we often take for granted, like the alphabet. It's like a linguistic time capsule.
It really is. And in the case of Latvian, this transformation wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about reclaiming their linguistic identity.
And I imagine those early adopters of the new orthography faced a few hurdles along the way.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine trying to type those brand new diacritics when technology wasn't quite on board. We're talking early computers, typewriters. They just weren't equipped to handle these unique characters.
So how do they manage? Do they just abandon the diacritics altogether?
Latvians are a resourceful bunch. They developed this clever system of transliteration. Essentially, they used combinations of letters from the standard Latin alphabet to represent the missing diacritics. For example, instead of using, let's say, a E, they might use ki to represent that specific palatalized sound.
That's incredible. Talk about dedication. To keep their language consistent, even with the limitations of technology, they were willing to adapt and innovate. It makes you appreciate the lengths they were willing to go to in order to preserve those unique sounds and spellings.
And it speaks volumes about their dedication to their linguistic heritage. To really illustrate this evolution, I think a side-by-side comparison is in order. Take a look at this. Here's the Lord's Prayer in various versions of written Latvian, starting from the first recorded version in 1544 all the way to its modern adaptation for the internet age.
Wow, talk about a linguistic glow-up. It's amazing how much the written form has changed over time, yet the core message remains the same. It's a powerful reminder that language is a living, breathing thing. It adapts and evolves, but its essence endures.
Beautifully put. And we've only scratched the surface. Ready to dive into the fascinating and, yes, sometimes intricate world of Latvian grammar.
Hit me with your best shot, but let's try to keep it from feeling like we're back in grammar school, all right?
I hear you. No pop quizzes, I promise. But Latvian grammar has a bit of a reputation.
A reputation for being what, exactly?
Well, let's just say it likes to keep things interesting.
Uh-oh. This sounds ominous.
For instance, did you know that Latvian has not one, not two, but 7 cases?
7 cases. All right, you're not going to lose me there. I vaguely remember those from my brief and somewhat traumatic encounter with Latin back in high school, but honestly, I couldn't tell you what a grammatical case actually does.
Think of cases as the ultimate multitaskers of the grammar world. They're like tiny but mighty flags attached to nouns, and their sole purpose is to tell you exactly how that noun is functioning within a sentence.
So instead of relying on prepositions like to, from, or with, like we do in English, Latvian elegantly embeds that information directly onto the noun itself. Slick.
Precisely. Each case has its own special ending that signals its role in the sentence. And with 7 cases at its disposal, Latvian can express a really nuanced range of relationships between words without relying on extra prepositions.
So it's like each noun comes with its own set of tools ready to tackle any grammatical task. I'm starting to understand why Latvian grammar gets a reputation for being a bit, shall we say, dynamic.
Dynamic is one way to put it, but here's the thing. Even though it has all these cases, the system is actually quite consistent. Once you learn the pattern for one group of nouns, you can pretty much apply it across the board. Latvian might be intricate, but it's not to trick you.
That actually makes me feel a bit better. But you know what really threw me for a loop when I was researching? This article mentioning that Latvian has pitch accent. Now, I've heard of tonal languages like Mandarin or Thai, where the pitch of your voice can completely change the meaning of a word, but I had no idea this was a thing in an Indo-European language.
It's one of those features that makes Latvian truly stand out from its Indo-European siblings, and it's more common in Baltic and Slavic languages than you might think. Just like those diacritics we talked about guide pronunciation, pitch accent adds an entirely new layer of meaning to spoken Latvian.
So not only do you need to nail those 7 cases and diacritics, but you also have to be mindful of your pitch. No wonder Latvians make such amazing singers. They're practically wired for linguistic complexity.
Maybe there's a connection. Now, since we're on the topic of sounds, remember those palatalized consonants we talked about earlier, those letters with the commas?
Oh yeah, those tricky little devils.
They're notorious for being tricky for English speakers to master because those specific sounds just aren't part of our everyday phonetic repertoire.
Okay, I'm up for a challenge. Give me an example. What's a good Latvian word with one of these palatalized consonants that'll put my pronunciation to the test?
All right, try this one on for size orbis. It means pumpkin in Latvian. Notice how that E sound with that little comma underneath forces your tongue to make that subtle Y sound.
Irbis. Pumpkin. Okay, I can sort of hear it, but I know I need to practice that one. It's amazing how, even though these sounds are new to me as an English speaker, they make perfect sense within the system of Latvian.
Exactly, and that's part of the beauty of language learning. You're training your ear to recognize and even reproduce sounds you never knew existed.
It's like opening up a whole new world of sonic possibilities. But we can't forget that language is never static. It's constantly evolving, picking up influences from its surroundings. And Latvian, with its long and rich history, has definitely seen its fair share of cultural exchange. What are some of the major influences that have left their mark on the language?
You're absolutely right. Latvian is a language shaped by its neighbors, bearing traces of centuries of interaction. You can see it in the vocabulary, grammatical nuances, and even the way people express themselves. It's like a linguistic tapestry, woven with threads from different cultures. And when it comes to Latvian, you can't talk about influences without mentioning the impact of German.
Makes sense. Close proximity often leads to a bit of linguistic borrowing. What about other languages that have had a significant impact?
Centuries of close contact, particularly during the time of the Hanseatic League, left a lasting imprint on Latvian. You'll actually find a surprising number of German loanwords embedded in everyday Latvian. Words like veikals, which means shop, and dervis, meaning door, have their roots in German.
Fascinating. So like these words are little linguistic time capsules, revealing glimpses into Latvia's past.
Precisely. And of course, we can't overlook the impact of Russian on Latvian. During the Soviet period, Russian became the language of administration and education, so it inevitably left its mark. You'll mostly see this influence in technical terms and bureaucratic jargon, where Russian words were often adopted to fill gaps where Latvian equivalents didn't yet exist.
It's a reminder of how language can reflect those power dynamics. Those shifts in cultural dominance often leave a linguistic legacy. But I'm also curious about the impact of English. With globalization and the internet, English words are finding their way into languages all over the world. Is Latvian immune?
It's a phenomenon that's happening everywhere, and Latvian is definitely experiencing its fair share of English loanwords, too. It's especially prevalent in fields like technology, business, and pop culture, where English often sets the pace for innovation and trends.
It's a debate that we see happening in languages all over the globe, how to embrace the natural dynamism of language while also safeguarding its unique identity. It's a tricky balance to strike.
Tell me about it. And it's a topic that people are understandably passionate about. Some worry that Latvian is at risk of becoming a hybrid language, losing some of its distinctiveness. But I think it's important to remember that adaptation has always been key to Latvian survival. This is a language that has weathered many storms, always emerging with its identity intact.
It's a good reminder that languages aren't museum artifacts. They're living, breathing entities that evolve with the times. They adapt to new situations, they borrow, they lend, and somehow they retain their essence. It's quite remarkable when you think about it.
Exactly. And that brings us to a crucial question. What's the state of Latvian today? How is it navigating the challenges of a globalized world where English often feels ubiquitous?
That's what I'm eager to delve into. Is Latvian holding its own, or is it at risk of being overshadowed?
That's a question that weighs heavily on the minds of many Latvians. And based on what I've gathered from these articles and studies, I'd say it's a bit of a mixed bag.
A mixed bag. Intriguing. Tell me more. What are some of the biggest challenges facing Latvian today?
Well, the pressure from English is definitely a major one, especially among younger generations who are growing up in a digitally connected world that's pretty much saturated with English. Then there's the legacy of Russification to contend with. Even though Latvian is the official language, Russian is still widely spoken, which is a constant reminder of Latvia's complex history.
It sounds like Latvian is at a bit of a crossroads, facing pressures both internally and from the global dominance of English. So given all of that, is there hope for the future of the Latvian language?
I'm cautiously optimistic, and I'll tell you why. Despite the challenges, Latvians are incredibly resilient, and they've shown incredible dedication when it comes to preserving their linguistic heritage.
That's encouraging to hear. What kind of efforts are being made to ensure that Latvia not only survives, but thrives in this increasingly globalized world?
One of the most inspiring things I've come across is the resurgence of interest in traditional Latvian folk music, dance, and crafts. And it's not just about nostalgia either. It's about younger generations reclaiming their cultural identity and expressing it through their own artistic creations. It's quite powerful.
It really is. There's something so powerful about art's ability to breathe new life into a language, wouldn't you say? It's like it connects generations through shared creativity.
It's a force to be reckoned with. And we can't forget the importance of legislation when it comes to language revitalization. That language law passed back in 1989 was a pivotal moment for Latvian.
How so?
It reestablished Latvian as the official language, which paved the way for its resurgence in education, government, and public life in general.
So a legal framework to support a cultural movement. It makes sense. But you and I both know that laws can only do so much, right? At the end of the day, it comes down to people embracing their language and using it in their everyday lives. So what are some of the things you've come across that make you hopeful for the future of Latvian? What are some signs that people are actively choosing to speak and celebrate their language?
You're absolutely right. It all comes down to creating a cultural environment where Latvian can thrive.
Yeah.
And there are some really encouraging examples of this happening. For instance, have you seen what's happening in the Latvian theater scene these days?
Fill me in.
It's absolutely booming. They're producing some really innovative, cutting-edge productions, all in Latvian, and it's attracting a whole new generation of theater goers.
That's amazing to hear. There's just something about live performance. It's like you're experiencing the language in its purest, most vibrant form. Have you noticed a resurgence in other areas too?
Absolutely. It's not just confined to the stage. Latvian music, especially the indie and alternative rock scene, is really having a moment right now.
Really? I had no idea.
It's true. And it's not just within Latvia either. They're starting to make waves internationally as well. And these bands, they're choosing to write and perform in Latvian, and it's really resonating with audiences. It's proof that you don't have to sacrifice your linguistic identity to achieve artistic success.
I love that. It's such a powerful message, isn't it? They're not just creating incredible music, they're championing their language on a global stage.
Exactly.
As we've been talking about all of this, I'm struck by how Latvians seem to have found this incredible balance, this way of honoring their past while embracing the future. And they're doing it all while speaking their own language. It makes you think, doesn't it?
About.
About the relationship between language and identity, especially in the face of globalization.
It's such an important conversation to be having, and it highlights something we often take for granted. Language is at the very heart of culture. It's how we tell our stories, it's how we pass down traditions, it's our connection to our past. And in a world that often feels like it's becoming increasingly homogenized, well, preserving linguistic diversity, keeping those unique voices alive, it feels more important than ever.
It really does. It makes you realize that losing a language, it's not just about losing words, it's about losing an entire way of seeing the world, a unique perspective that has evolved over centuries.
Beautifully put, each language is like a prism. It reflects the human experience in its own distinct way. And when we lose a language, we lose a piece of that richness, that incredible tapestry of human expression.
It's a sobering thought. But I have to say, hearing about the passion and dedication of Latvians, the way they're actively choosing to use and celebrate their language, well, it gives me hope.
Me too. They're not just passively accepting the dominance of English, they're making a conscious choice to keep their language relevant in their lives.
And that's such a key takeaway from all of this, isn't it? The future of Latvian, the future of any language for that matter, ultimately rests in the hands of its speakers.
It's true. It's about recognizing the value of what makes each language special, that incredible diversity, and actively creating spaces, both physically and metaphorically, where those languages can thrive.
So, what can our listeners do to support linguistic diversity? It's obviously more than just learning Latvian. It's about approaching all languages with a sense of curiosity and respect, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to step outside your linguistic comfort zone. Watch a foreign film. Listen to music in another language. Heck, even trying learning a few basic phrases can open up a whole new world.
It's all about opening ourselves up to new ways of thinking, new ways of experiencing the world. And who knows, we might just uncover a hidden passion for languages along the way.
It's certainly possible. But most importantly, let's remember to approach all languages, whether they have millions of speakers or just a few thousand, with a sense of wonder and respect.
Beautifully said. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this incredible deep dive into the Latvian language. It's been a journey through linguistic history, cultural influences, and a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit.
It really has. Thanks for having me along for the ride.
The pleasure was all mine. And to all our listeners out there, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about the world of languages, don't let that spark fade. Keep exploring. There are countless linguistic adventures waiting to be discovered.
Happy language learning, everyone.
Until next time, keep those languages alive.